What's up, guys? So today we're back here with EvoMoto's DR650. Finally, the head and all my parts came in, so today we're going to be rebuilding it. And the key to rebuilding any engine is just to be smooth and methodical and to have the manual. There's really nothing all that complicated, whether it's an engine or a transmission or whatever. As long as you replace all the wear parts and put it back together the way it was, you're going to be golden. So we're going to start by stripping down the bike and then removing everything we need. This is an air-cooled bike, so this should be really pretty straightforward. I got the head over there, and then once we get this one off, we're going to take some measurements. We're going to compare, because there's been a lot of discussion as to what has actually been done with this bike, and so we're gonna do a little bit of fact checking. And then we're going to figure out what parts we want to use to reassemble it, and then we're going to be good to go. When you do this on this bike, things you need to buy brand new. Brand new head gasket, and the 4 head bolts are stretch bolts. So they really need to be replaced when you replace the head. And of course, you need to make sure you have the manual so that you have all the torque specs. So we're going to start by showing you guys how to tear down this bike, then we'll move to the workbench. So disassembly starts with the basic stuff. We remove the seat and the gas tank. So now that we are at the engine, what we need to do is we need to first remove these 3 10mm bolts and remove this assembly. We will disconnect the spark plugs and remove them. We're going to unbolt the exhaust. We're going to remove the carburetor, and then that'll give us access to remove this upper assembly, and I'll show you guys how to do that. I just wanted to make sure it was clear what the procedure was. Then once all of this is out of the way, this upper valve cover is off, there'll be nothing stopping us from yanking the head. Alright, now that we've taken off all the oil fittings, the carb's out of the way, the exhaust's out of the way, now we can loosen this guy. This is the cam chain tensioner. And we want to be able to put it back later exactly as we found it, so I'm actually not going to loosen the thing. I'm going to remove the entire tensioner assembly like this. And then once this is off, we'll go back through and remove all of these 10mm bolts up here so that we can remove the valve cover. Alright, now that everything's stripped off, the next step is you want to remove this guide bolt right here. And you want to remove the cam, and to remove the cam you actually have to undo this cam retainer bolt right here and then rotate the engine, and then there's another one on the other side. So once you get both of these out like that, we got to rotate the engine, pull the other one out, and then we actually remove the camshaft and the gear. So here you can see we've removed the second bolt. You want to make sure you pull out this guy with it. And then as you can see, this cam gear slides off. This right here is another important thing. It's an old trick. You want to take a piece of wire and you want to string up this so that you never have to worry about the chain dropping down into the case, because you don't want to do that. Now, once the cam is out, and you just have to play with it until it comes out with the gear, the next step is simply to remove these main head stud bolts, whatever you want to call them. They are a 14mm, and I'm actually going to get a long wrench. So you just want to undo them crisscross patterns. We'll start with this one, and there we go. We'll start with this guy, and we'll do that one, then we'll do this one, then we'll do that one. And then once you're done with that, there's 2 nuts, one right here and then one on the front of the motor. That is a huge pain in the butt to get to, but you have to undo them, and they're sitting on studs, and then the head will just lift up entirely, and I'll show you guys that in a second. Alright, so now we got the 2 nuts off the sides, we got all 4 bolts out. We can actually just give it a couple of good hits with a rubber mallet. As you can see, it's already starting to lift off. Now we just have to wiggle it back and forth basically until we can get it to come out, pass the chain through, and then we can get it on the workbench. And I'll show you guys what actually happened with this head, and we'll compare the two. Another thing I found real quick is you actually have to remove this oil cooler bracket and let it hang down here to get the head off. But now we should be able to basically just lift the head off. Cool. Lift the head off and we'll get these slid out, and we'll get everything in part. So starting from the top view, this is our old head, and in the previous video some of you guys said that you couldn't see what I was pointing at. What I was pointing at was this. You can see where this is clearly broken out. That's what's supposed to look like stock. But the real problem is when you flip this over, this is our good head. This is our new head, and you can see here's the valves and everything looks like it should. Now if we flip over Matt's head, something is clearly not where it's supposed to be. So this guy, he dropped a valve basically, and that's what led to his demise. This is why we couldn't crank all the way through. So if we go back and we take a look at the piston, you can see I cleaned up the piston, and here's the imprint that was left by our lower valve that had dropped down. You can see these are the factory recesses that are cut, and this was the one we made by dropping the valve. But the piston looks to be in good shape. I don't see any cracking, and other than a little bit of pitting. So if anything, we just added a little bit of displacement to this bike, so it's like a 651 now. But yeah, so you can see this surface is clean and clear. We got our new head here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out which of the parts I want to use, because remember, we need to replace, this is Matt's factory rockers. These are in okay condition, but we need to replace this right here because this is what actually destroyed it. So if anybody's curious as to what happened, here's what happened. This guy right here backed itself out, and this is a hardened steel piece right here. It got caught right here, which if we take our camshaft actually sits like this in the head. And what happened is, boom, you can see the wear mark right there. This guy right here just smashed in it, and it got stuck under there and punched a hole through there, and when it did that, one of the valves was probably down, and it just snapped the valve, and that was basically game over. So we are going to put this head back on the bike, and then we're going to replace a few bits in here. I think we're going to use Matt's because it looks to be in better condition than the other one. We're going to put everything back together, put it back all on the bike, and fire her up. Here is our new head gasket. So it just lays in place right here on the dowels. So this is the parts I ordered. We got a new plug, and then we got new bolts. Two of these are 200 millimeter, one's a 190 and one's a 180, and they go in specific places. So first things first is we got to get the head fit back on to the bike, and then we can start putting other stuff on around it. So now that we got the head basically just gently rocking on there with the gasket, what we're going to do is we're actually going to put on these two 12 millimeter nuts we took off in the front and the rear. We're going to tighten them down. I got the torque spec over here. Then once they're tight, we'll put in our 4 bolts in their specific holes and get those tightened down as well. So as far as the head studs are concerned, there's 2 180 millimeter units, and they actually go on the exhaust side. So for now, we're just going to drop them in. And make sure you don't forget your copper washer. On that side, they're already on the head, but over here, I got to drop them in separately. So on the intake, on the cam side is the longest bolt. It's 200 millimeter. And then this is the 190 millimeter, and it goes on the intake, not cam side. And that's pretty much it. For that, so we'll get those bolted down, we'll get them torqued down. I still got to put the nuts on the studs, and we should be ready to rock and roll. So here we're using a torque wrench, and these studs need to be, these bolts need to be set to 27.5 foot-pounds. So what you want to do is you want to gently crank them until you hear the torque wrench pop. There we go, that's 27.5 foot-pounds. So we did 1, 2, now we're going to do the third one over here. You want to do them in a crisscross pattern. Now that all your bolts are tightened, you want to make sure you put in this cam lock right here. And then you want to make sure you buy a new plug, and as you can see, it's got a slit cut out in it. And you want to make sure that slit is pointing up. So just like that. And now we can put on the gear and set the timing. Another thing to note, I've already done this, it's on the other side. But you need to set the piston to TDC And the way you do that is you basically take off the side plug and you spin the crank until you see the little marker, and then you just line it up, and that's TDC. So there we go. You can see the hash marks are totally even with the head. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to rotate the crank to rotate this over a little bit so we can get the other bolt on this clip torqued in, and then we can just continue with our reassembly. Next, we're going to install this chain guide back in. So the way you want to do this is you want to just be very careful and just kind of wiggle it down here. And this bolt has to go through this hole up here. And unfortunately, there's not really any clever way of doing it other than just to get it like that. And then you just torque it down and you're all good to go. And you can see right here, we've got both of these bolts torqued down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset top dead center here in a second. And we're going to basically just walk the cam through to make sure that everything works. So now we got all this on. Again, it's very important you go back and set your valves properly and torque everything down. So that's what I did. I torqued everything down. Now we're just going to reattach all of these extra little hoses, the oil lines, put the carburetor back in, gas tank seat, blah blah blah. And then hopefully we're going to hook it up to the truck and jump start it, and hopefully it'll fire right up. Oh, here we go. There she is, all running and driving. Boss.